Welcome to Wellspring on the Air. I'm Judith, Lemus, a therapist at Wellspring and the host of today's show about immigration and mental health. With me today to discuss this important topic is Dr. Christopher Cheung, our guest. Together, we want to help bring a better understanding of immigration and how being an immigrant can affect mental health. So stay with us. We've got some needed conversation about the challenges of immigration, mental health, and how we can lend a hand. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you for having me, Judith.
Glad to have you. Let's go ahead and get right into it. What do we need to know about immigration and mental health?
Absolutely. It's an amazing topic for myself as well to have an opportunity to share about this. As we know, the United States is growing, and part of that growth is a lot of people who are immigrants themselves or family of immigrants. Individuals who are children of immigrant families. Our statistics have shown a growth in 2018. Roughly 44 million people in the United States right now are either immigrants or just families of immigrants. So this is a much needed topic to talk about how we can be of help, the mental health challenges that they face, and how we can be of help to them. The challenges that immigrant and children of immigrant has only recently gained attention in the mental health field, and we are learning more and more how their adjustments and how the services we can render them from a mental health perspective, but also from an individual perspective, how we can assist them in the transition into a new environment, into a new country.
Yeah, with so many immigrants in this country, so many people are being affected. So what are some factors that are important to pay attention to with immigrant individuals and families?
Absolutely. As an immigrant myself, I have often paid attention to how my transition was. So this is not an exhaustive list. Certainly, a lot of the factors that we pay attention to is how they enter the country. Did they come here by choice, or they more refugees, or those who are seeking asylum? That can have an impact on how they are adjusting to the new culture, adjusting to the new way of living. Socioeconomic status is also a big key factor. Did they come in from trying to escape poverty, for example, or those who already have higher education, just transitioning, hoping to build a new life in the new country, here in the United States, of course. And that also impacts the resources, the accessibility, the adjustments, and their well-being overall. Another factor that we can consider, do they come here by themselves? And are they hoping to later bring in their family, or maybe they come together as a family? That helps with the feeling of being alone or not. That can be definitely a factor in their transition. And lastly, do they come into areas, we call them gateway communities, meaning are these traditional communities that has typically received people of those nationality, those racial background. An example I give is in Miami. There's a lot more Cuban Americans, as we noted. And so that transition can help for people who are more familiar perhaps with the Latin background, and they are have more resources, have more accessibility, can build a community in a much more fluid way than those who, for example, maybe from an Asian background coming to Miami, they don't have that great of a population, right? So it limits their ability to gain access to resources sometimes, or finding support and assistance.
Okay, so yeah, different backgrounds mean different experiences as an immigrant. What about some of the challenges that new immigrants face?
Yeah, and this is part of the big research that has gone for years. And a simple way for us to understand this is through the model that proposed by Dr. Barry White. He outlined, just different strategies, and each of these strategies in and of itself has an impact or an outcome to on an individual's well-being. So we're going to be talking more so from an individual perspective, but you can imagine how complex it can get once you introduce families, once you introduce different or different transition, different development. But I'll start more simple. One of the strategies that many have used, and even was a big, there's a big push for it early on in the United States. It was the assimilation strategy, which is replacing one's culture of origin with a new culture. And it's the individual may learn the English language, for example, learn their mannerisms, understand their morals, understand the nuance of a culture, and they essentially replacing their own, maybe losing that fluency in their own culture of origin, including language, including food, including nutrition, right? And this has been helpful in a lot of instances when they are able to feel more connected to the immediate culture and the people in that culture. So being able to understand what the expectations are at a job, for example, or understanding the school system. I mean, that in and of itself is a complex area, but they begin to learn that. And at the same time, there's a loss there. They may lose touch with their own heritage, or they may lose touch with an important piece of their past in using this strategy. The second one is the separation strategy. In here, we have a lot of individuals, not a lot, but some pockets of individuals who just do not want to be influenced by the new culture. Talking in the context of US, they don't want to be influenced by the mannerisms. They don't want to influence by the life philosophies, their language. And so they maintain a lot of their own culture, and they just reject being influenced. They try to make it work. And this can work in, like I mentioned before, the gateway communities, right? So we're talking about things as you imagine Chinatown in New York, for example, Little Havana, where you don't really need the English language to thrive, to find work, to do well overall, but it limits their opportunities to expand their community, expand their social support. They stay mostly to themselves. It can work if the community and the culture in that community is welcoming and it's sustaining. I don't know if you have any examples yourself, maybe something that you see, but most elderly immigrants, those who come in and their late adulthood, typically adopt such strategies. Yeah. So the next one we're talking about is integration. This is another word for it is biculturalism. Sometimes they're used interchangeably. And this is the practice and appreciation of both the new culture or the culture that they're finding themselves in, as well as retaining a important essence of their culture of origin. This is now research has shown that this has been the best, having the best of both worlds, being able to navigate that. It's typically easier if your culture of origin is already closely aligned to the new culture. For example, I would think European of descent coming to the United States, they share a lot of similarities already in the way they approach life, in the way they think about families, and to think about the self, the individual, and much more challenging for those who maybe come from a more collectivist background, for example, into the United States. And being able to retain both has shown a remarkable ability to develop new perspective and better solution development or problem-solving ability. But it takes work. It takes a lot of work to being able to maintain both aspects of culture, right? Learning a new one while retaining your own. That can be helped if you have a good social system, if the community is very much supportive of that, and if there's opportunities to feel connected and accepted, that your culture is important, and as well as learning about how to thrive and survive in the new country, in the new culture.
Mm-hmm.
So last one is called the marginalization. Now, this one is more theoretical in nature, but what it can happen is someone who decides, I want to assimilate, I want to give up my own culture, adapt to the new one, and yet not able to. Perhaps the language is much more difficult to adopt, the culture, the nuances, or maybe this person is facing constant rejection from the new country, from the new culture, and yet he or she decide to give up their culture of origin, and they find themselves in a limbo. Theoretically speaking, this would be the least adaptive for an individual, where they don't find a sense of belonging in anywhere. And as you can imagine, it's one of the basic needs for people to feel connected, to feel part of a community. If you don't feel like you are, part of anything, it can lead to a very devastating self-esteem, work on self-concept, confidence, and knowing a sense of belonging. Transmutation is a fairly new one. This one I'm not as familiar, because this one is more recently proposed, but what it communicates is the strategy of creating a hybrid. So maybe it's a very much similar to the integration, but in the sense that, from what my understanding, it's developing a new, almost like a new language, a new culture, new way of being. And the best way I can think of this is maybe in the terms of food. Maybe we're celebrating Thanksgiving, but with more using different types of food. We don't use the turkey or the mashed potatoes. Maybe we're using more, rice and beans, or lechon, something along those lines, and create something new. It could be exciting, and I can see how this can be exciting and great for especially youth who may be growing up in the United States, but from an immigrant family, and just creating something for themselves. But I'm not sure. I'll definitely want to look more into this strategy and see how it plays out.
It's interesting that you mentioned the food as an example. My family is an immigrant family as well. And for Thanksgiving, we do have the turkey, but we have it very Hispanic, very El Salvador style, pan con pavo, which is a turkey sandwich, a very specific type of turkey sandwich native to that country. So I can really see what you're talking about there.
It's awesome. That's awesome. And certainly feel free to share as well. And for our listeners, how is your experience? How has things changed for you? Maybe if you are from a family of immigrants, how have you created something new out of it? Or how have you feel a sense of belonging? It's just a simple way of finding ourselves connected. And from connection, we have that ability to feel stable and safe. So that's a big part of what helps for immigrants as they adapt to the new country, to the new environment.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and take a short break to thank one of our sponsors who makes the production of our podcast possible. When we come back, we'll hear more from Christopher on immigration and mental health. Welcome back to Wellspring on the Air. This is Judith Lemus. If you are just joining our show, our topic today is immigration and mental health. So far today, we've talked about what the different ways immigration can look like in the U.S. and some of the challenges of new immigrants. If you joined us late, you can find us on your favorite podcast channel on Wellspring on the Air, or on our website blog page at wellspringmiami.org. Just search for this topic, immigration and mental health. So Chris, we've talked about the different factors that affect immigrants What are the mental health challenges for new immigrants?
Yeah, as you can imagine, just adapting to a new culture is already stressful from the basic needs, but certainly we can not imagine, the research and the literature has shown that, a lot of issues that makes it hard to feel comfortable, to feel stable. Mainly learning the language. The language barrier seems to be a key in ability to adapt, to be able to access resources, to find community. Um, Beyond that, there's also other factors, such as the country perhaps has a history with a certain nationality or racial tension that may have occurred in the past. For example, in my own story, the model minority has affected a lot of Asian Americans, and that may be something that was in the past, but it still have an ongoing effect today. How people treat certain races, how people treat certain nationalities, people from certain nationalities, has an impact on a way that we feel included or excluded. A lot of immigrant families sometimes come in already escaping poverty or escaping war, and they're usually in survival mode. So they're living in a sense of, I need to find the resources, food, shelter, something to keep them safe and keep them through the day. As you can imagine, many of these families typically live in lower socioeconomic status communities or neighborhoods, and from there they can be worrying about their own health and their children's health. That they perhaps experienced trauma in the past. The whole process of immigration can be traumatic for those who didn't choose to leave, or maybe didn't have a decision making in this transition to a new country. So those are some factors to consider. And so, as you imagine, without the proper support, without proper help, a lot of times they may develop anxiety or depression about their situations, or feel isolated in many instances. Then on top of that, we put in employment, right? If they haven't been able to learn the language or feel that they connect with people well, the opportunities for work, for jobs is limited. That increases the worry about whether I'm able to take care of myself, take care of my family. The income may not be as consistent as they would like it. And, again, with stability, that's a big key. Some of them may actually experience a social status shift. I hear a lot of people, clients, friends who come from where they're from, their education, they may be engineers or they may be doctors, but it doesn't translate. It doesn't, they can't apply their craft or their trade in the new country, and they have to start over. Now they have to work in positions that they need to get new training for, and that brings itself a lot of stress. Perhaps there's also those who find it hard to relate to the people in their surroundings. A great cultural distance, as the term is called. For example, those who value being able to strive for one's goals, strive for one's career, whereas others are more tied to family. I'm more giving of myself, sacrificing my own individual needs or my dreams to support those who I care for, those in the family, and those things come into play as well. And of course, lastly, limited health resources. Some immigrants that I've known are worried whether their status as documented or undocumented, whether they're staying in status, whether the seeking hospitals or doctors may impact them severely financially. So you can imagine a lot of these issues can bring about a lot of worry, and that can lead to anxiety or depression in a sense. And I didn't even have time to touch on some of the intergenerational traumas that we were talking about, or being able to adapt even within the family, how people are adapting differently. Maybe the older generation are staying within their own culture, but the younger ones are more growing up influenced more by the new culture, and that can lead to misunderstandings, conflict in the home, In even in my situation, it's a language thing, right? I can speak the language of my parents, but there's still misunderstanding. There's still miscommunication going on. And that's because of the nuanced cultural aspect that I don't have, that they grew up with. And then so I cannot express myself clearly, or I cannot explain some of the processes that's required in school, for example, in college, why it's important to network. They have no clue what networking means and why that's important. So that's a smaller example, but you can imagine how much more difficult it is when for more important aspects in an individual's life that they can't feel understood even within their own family. And it's tough. It's tough. Lastly, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that, being an immigrant doesn't just mean that you could be disconnected from the community around you, but all of a sudden you could become disconnected from your close family, and that can be so difficult.
Absolutely. Learning and about these challenges gave me a better appreciation of my family and other people around me that I know who had that immigration experience or are children of immigrant families. And so part of that is understanding what they're going through and how we can be responsive and be help to them.
Yeah. So what can we do to be of help, to be responsive, to be understanding? What can we do?
Yeah. So a large part of that is we can, as the Bible mentions several passages of being kind, showing hospitality to strangers. In Hebrews 13:2, for example, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some may have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. So learning about the people and their story, how they came to the United States, for example, what are the challenges that they've had to undergo in adapting. We learn about their culture as well, coming from a culturally humble and curious place. Let's learn about what their celebration, their holidays, their food. Those can be a good connecting source for helping them feel that they're not strangers, that they're not rejected, but certainly we're able to build a cultural bridge, in a sense, to welcome them and helping them find support and stability. There's definitely a lot of opportunities. We can help even outside of a counseling setting, for example, just reaching out to neighbors or friends or people from church maybe, and just asking them, hey, what are some things that may be confusing to you? How's the school? How's your child? And help them break it down, some of the complex nature of school and work. It'd be wonderful. We can also point them to community resources that are out there. In Miami-Dade County, we have CASA, which is the National Immigration Legal Service, or there is a Catholic Charities that can be helpful in offering just basic needs, such as where to find food or where to help them navigate through the different challenges of documents, or being able to have their children placed in the correct school, how they navigate through all of those complex structure that's set in place. One more thing that I'll certainly mention is in my experience, most immigrant and individuals are not readily open to mental health services until they can get a sense of how that can be helpful to them. And even then, counseling and psychology, all those words may sometimes feel a bit unfamiliar, and thus harder for them to be open to it. But when they are, we as counselors should be readily available to be culturally responsive in our ways to respond to their needs and be able to help to them.
Of course, yeah. Depending on the culture, things like therapy and psychology might be a negative thing.
And so we can create different opportunities, workshops, books, even podcasts are ways we can help them gain a better sense of how they can adapt. And if they find themselves in need, maybe they'll be open to mental health services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, making ourselves readily available where they don't necessarily have to go and search, but where we can be in places or speak in places, like you said, the podcasts, where they can maybe come across. Just listening to the radio might be a good way. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So you did mention a verse already on hospitality and treating others kindly, because we don't know. We are to treat them kindly according to scripture. Is there any other Bible verses, any other Christian perspective that we can take to view this on how we help in immigration and immigrant families and individuals?
Absolutely. There's two verses that typically comes to mind for me. First one is Leviticus 19:34. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. It's welcoming. It's very comforting to know that we are to love others as ourselves. And that is one of the major commandments, right, that Jesus gave. And also in Matthew 25:35, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. Just ministering to people through meeting their basic needs and being there for them. It's a calling for some, and that can be reassuring that we can be of help, that we are to extend and show God's love and grace to anyone, and especially those who are dealing with all these different challenges in life as they transition to a new country, to a new culture, to a new way of being. Right?
I love it. Definitely, it's an act of love and an act of obedience. All right. It is time to close our show. Thank you, Chris, for joining us today and shedding light on the topic of immigration and mental health. We hope you learned more about how immigration affects so many of the people around us and how we can be of help to them. And thank you for joining our show today. Again, if you joined this program midstream, you can find this show and others on podcasts at Wellspring on the Air or on our blog on wellspringmiami.org. The title of today's show again was Immigration and Mental Health. Encourage us and let us know you are listening by sending comments or questions to ontheair@wellspringmiami.org. It's time to wrap up. This is Judith Lemus with Wellspring on the Air, because hearts and minds matter.